I interviewed two students about how they feel about YICAC as a forum and how they feel about racism on campus.
2 blocks ago, a kid in my class came up to me after class and said, "Hey, nice to meet you." Introduced himself and asked where I was from. I said Georgia, and he said, "No, where are you really from?" And I said, "Georgia, Augusta." And he was like, "No, like, what do you have in you?" I was like, "Oh, well, my mom is Petey and my dad is part Cherokee." Um, and he was like, "Oh, so do your parents work on a casino?"
I think there's definitely going to be a pretty good mix because from what I've seen, there are basically two main groups of people. People who just want to use it to be funny and ask like relatable questions, and then another that is going to be offensive. And I think that's a pretty small subset, but that's the part that causes a problem.
So I think there's no greater issue right now than the race tensions that have been building up campuses across the country and including here at CC. Um, just recently, right before we left for Thanksgiving break, there was a big rumor flying around about two students being expelled for the racist comments posted on Yik Yak a few weeks ago. And allegedly, these are from South Park episodes, so a lot of people are making the argument that it was just a joke. And I think this whole issue of racism being funny is a very big problem, not just at CC, but around the world. Um, and so our campus did have some repercussions for this. We did have a campus-wide assembly instead of first Monday, which I think was a very important step in terms of at least getting people's ideas out there, getting people's voices heard, and showing the whole school that this wasn't something that the administration or the students were taking lightly. So I was very thankful for that, but I think that after the assembly, a lot of the students didn't have the reactions that the assembly was meant to inspire. They said things like, "Oh, we just feel yelled at as white students. We feel guilty. We feel like we can't actually say anything about racism because we're white." And I think this is an absolutely ridiculous thing to say. The assembly was not meant to yell at white students. It was meant to point out that there is an issue of racism on campus, no matter how liberal of a school we may be. People also said that microaggressions aren't really a thing here, and even if they are, they're not actual like violent acts like the ones that happened at Dartmouth or Yale or Mizzou recently. So CC is technically not as bad as other schools. And I also think this is absolutely ridiculous because if racism exists anywhere, it's a problem. And I think microaggressions in many ways are one of the most terrible things you can do because it's not like an explicit act of violence, but it is subtle and it makes people feel uncomfortable and unwanted. And as a college student, nobody wants to feel this way, especially if they're already stand out as different, if they have a different skin color or are from somewhere else. I've experienced racism for a very long time. Being from Philadelphia, I live 2 blocks from City Line, which is the dividing line between the suburbs and the actual city. So this literally draws a line between the wealthy, white, predominantly Jewish people that go through one of the top 3 public school systems in Pennsylvania, and the poor African American community, which attends one of the worst. I saw racism pretty much every day growing up, whether it be towards young children who were always assumed to be responsible for bike thefts, or my Sri Lankan mother who was verbally assaulted by a police officer. So coming to college, I really assumed that things would be different here at CC, but I still see the same things. I see black students you just feel that tension between people who are of color and people who aren't in your class because it's often only one or two, and they're kind of expected to kind of stand for their race as that one person, which is something that white people never have to do. We're never asked, if someone made this point during the assembly, we're never asked, "Oh, what does it feel like to be white?" Because it's like asking, what is it like to be a human, because that's what kind of just assumed like white is normal. I think that it's not okay also to say like people make the argument that, oh, people also make fun of white people all the time. So if you are in a position of power like white people are, you're never really discriminated against. But if you are making fun of someone who is in a minority group, that is racism because you're in a position of power and you are demonizing someone who is kind of lesser socially than you. And it is a terrible thing on college campuses because you're always making this group of people who already are kind of think of themselves as a statistic to make diversity more of a thing here at CC feel more unwelcome. And this is kind of a terrible analogy. I was thinking about this recently. But in a zoo, when you go to animals who are obviously very different from you, um, they aren't holding up signs about their lives and where they come from. And I think that we as people, as white people, always expect, like, oh, why aren't they teaching us about themselves? Why aren't they educating us about their culture? Because we don't know about it. But these animals in the zoos, they aren't holding up signs. The zookeepers are the people who write those signs and make it known. We are the people who actually should be teaching each other about different races and actually making an effort to learn about it. Um, and last thing, I think a lot of people on college campuses, especially CC, they say they don't want to be politically involved. But I think this is much more of a less of a political issue and more of just a human issue. And if you're involved in the human race and its survival, I think you can't ignore this issue. And I don't think that we can survive as a race if this continues the way that's been going.